Some oddities live in nightmares, some live in textbooks, but some live inside your own body and they have a mind of their own. Guys, before we get into this one, if you're new here, welcome to Medical Oddities. We tell true stories about the strange, the unexplained, and the downright bizarre corners of medical history. If that sounds like your kind of gig, go ahead and hit the subscribe button and turn on all notifications so you don't miss the next one. Trust me, it only gets weirder from here. Let me tell you guys about Karen Burns' morning routine. Karen wakes up, she gets out of bed, she walks to her closet to pick out clothes for the day, she reaches for a blouse with her right hand, and her left hand slaps it away. She tries again. Right hand grabs shirt, left hand rips it right out of her grip and throws it on the ground. This isn't the punchline to a joke, and this isn't some weird compulsion or tic. Karen's left hand is actively fighting her decisions, refusing to cooperate fully, and it would only get worse. Finally gets the shirt, she's buttoning said shirt with her right hand, getting ready for work, normal morning stuff, and her left hand would start unbuttoning it at the bottom on the way up just as fast as she would button the top. She is literally fighting herself all the time. One time when she was walking down the street, her left hand just reached up and punched her in the face. Just hauled off and hit her with her own hand. She has no control over it. Another time, her left hand grabbed her throat and started squeezing. She had to use her right hand to pry her own fingers off her neck before she was choked unconscious. Now you might be thinking, okay, this is some psychological disorder, some kind of dissociative disorder or whatever. This is 100% neurological. Karen Byrne had brain surgery when she was 27 years old to control severe epilepsy. The surgery worked and the seizures stopped, but her left hand, it wasn't hers anymore. Karen isn't alone in this one either. In 2000, a 77-year-old woman, we'll call her Mrs. S, woke up from a stroke and discovered that her left hand had gone rogue. It would grab objects without her permission, reach out and touch people she didn't want to touch, throw things across the room. She described it as, it feels like someone else is controlling it, like there's another person in my arm that's not me. Her family simply thought she was losing her mind at 77, but the neurologists knew exactly what they were looking at. We can even take the case from the 1990s of a man whose hand would unzip his pants in public. Just reach down and start undoing his fly. He'd be standing there in line at the grocery store having a normal conversation, and his hand would betray him. The embarrassment was crushing. He started just sitting on his hand in public to keep it still. Another patient we won't name is a woman in her 60s. She had a hand that would grab food off other people's plates at restaurants specifically. She'd be sitting there, mortified, while her hand reached across the table and stole someone's dinner roll. She couldn't stop it. In fact, she couldn't even feel it happening until she had already done the deed. One of the most documented cases from the early 2000s involved a man whose left hand became violently opposed to cigarettes, and he was a lifelong smoker, so every time he tried to light a cigarette with his right hand, his left hand would slap it out of his mouth. If he managed to get it lit, the left hand would literally grab it and crush it. So was his subconscious trying to quit smoking? Was his body rebelling against a habit his brain knew was killing him? Maybe, but here's the thing. His left hand also tried to strangle him in his sleep on multiple occasions. He had to start wearing an oven mitt over his left hand at night so he wouldn't wake up being choked by his own fingers. So what the hell is actually going on here? Let's just talk about your brain for a second. Your brain is split down the middle into two hemispheres, left and right, and for the most part, they control opposite sides of your body. The left hemisphere controls the right side, the right hemisphere controls your left side. These two hemispheres are connected by a thick bundle of nerve fibers called the corpus callosum. It's basically the information highway between the two halves of your brain, and it lets them communicate, coordinate, and work together. In theory, when that connection gets severed, either through surgery, stroke, tumor, or trauma, things get pretty weird. We're talking really weird. See, in most people, your left hemisphere is usually the dominant one. It's where most of your language processing happens, your logical thinking and your sense of self and intention. When you decide to pick up a cup of coffee, that decision is coming from your left hemisphere. Your right hemisphere is more spatial, more emotional, and more intuitive. It processes visual information, recognizes faces, and handles most creativity. Under normal circumstances, they work together seamlessly. You never really even notice them as separate entities. But when the corsum callosum is damaged, they stop talking. And suddenly, you've got two brains, two centers of intention, and two competing wills inside of one body. The left hemisphere still controls your right hand. That hand does what you consciously intend. But the right hemisphere now controls your left hand independently, and it has its own ideas on what that hand should be doing. This condition was first described in detail in 1908 by German neurologist Kurt Goldstein. He documented soldiers who'd suffered traumatic brain injuries in World War I. Some of them reported that their hands would act independently, grabbing objects and moving without permission, sometimes even fighting each other. But it wasn't fully understood until the 1960s and 70s, when neurosurgeons started performing split brain surgeries to treat severe epilepsy. So here's how this split brain surgery works. If you have epilepsy, really bad uncontrolled epilepsy, the seizures are basically electrical storms in your brain, and those storms can jump from one hemisphere to the other via the corpus callosum. So the solution in extreme cases is to cut it and sever that connection. That way, if a seizure starts in one hemisphere, it can't spread to the other. Now it sounds drastic, and it is, but for people with life-threatening epilepsy that doesn't respond to any kind of medications, this can be a lifesaver. The surgery almost always works and the seizures stop, but you've just created two independent brains inside of one skull, and that alone is why things get really interesting. There was a famous series of experiments in the 1960s with split brain patients. Researchers would show them images, but here's the trick. They'd show one image to the left visual field, which is processed by the right hemisphere, and a different image to the right visual field, which is processed by the left hemisphere. So they'd show this picture of a chicken claw to the left hemisphere and a picture of a snowy scene to the right. Then they'd ask the patient, "What did you see?" The patient would say a chicken claw because the left hemisphere, the one that handles language, saw the claw. But then they would ask the patient to point with their left hand to the related image, and the left hand would point to a snow shovel, because the right hemisphere, which controls the left hand, only saw the snowy scene. When asked why they pointed at the shovel, the patient would make up a reason. They'd say something like, "Oh, because you need a shovel to clean out the chicken coop." The left hemisphere, the conscious verbal part of the brain, had no idea what the right hemisphere had seen, but it couldn't admit that. So it invented a logical explanation on the spot. Your brain literally lies to you to maintain the illusion that you're a single unified person. So you might ask, what is it actually like to live like this? For most split brain patients, it's quite manageable. The two hemispheres learn to coexist and they develop their own routines. The alien hand still acts independently, but it's not constantly at war with the dominant hand. But for some people, like Karen, it's a daily battle. Karen had to develop combative strategies. She'd sit on her left hand during conversations so it wouldn't randomly grab someone or slap her face. She'd keep it occupied with stress balls or a book so it had something to do that wasn't destructive. She described it as if it was like having a toddler attached to your body, and you can't reason with it, but you also can't predict what it's going to do, so you just have to manage it the best you can. One patient reported that his alien hand had distinct preferences. It liked particular foods and would grab them. It also disliked certain textures and would throw those away. It started developing its own personality. Another patient said her alien hand seemed to have a sense of humor. It would wait until she was in incredibly important situations, meetings, church, family dinners, and then just do something wild. Like, it knew when the timing would be the most advantageous. Now, scientifically, we know that's not really possible. The right hemisphere doesn't have the language processing or the complex social awareness to deliberately mess with you. But then again, we don't fully understand consciousness. We don't fully understand how much awareness exists in the right hemisphere, especially when it's cut off from the left and has to adapt. Maybe it's not planning pranks, but maybe it's also not completely unconscious either. So there are different types of this condition depending on where the brain damage occurs. If the damage is in the frontal lobe, particularly on the left side, you get what's called this frontal variant. This is where the alien hand becomes more aggressive. It grabs, it throws, it hits, it's impulsive, and disinhibited, kind of like any frontal lobe damage in general. If the damage is on the corpus, the connection between the hemispheres, you get this colossal variant. This is the classic split brain situation where two hands with two different agendas constantly fight over each other. Now, if the damage is in the posterior parietal cortex, you get this posterior variant. This one's a little different. The alien hand isn't aggressive, it's more confused. It'll reach out and touch things without purpose. It's like the hand is just always exploring the world, but doesn't know why. There's also a rare variant where the alien hand actually seems relatively helpful. It'll do tasks automatically, picking up, dropping objects, tidying up things, helping with repetitive motions without any conscious intention. It's still alien, still not under voluntary control, but it's cooperative rather than combative. One patient described it as having a very efficient assistant who doesn't ask for instructions. But here's a question that keeps neuroscientists up at night. If your hand can act independently, if it has preferences and makes decisions, if it sometimes seems to have awareness, is it you or is it something else? This isn't just a medical oddity, it's a philosophical nightmare. Think about it. You think of yourself as one person, one consciousness, one unified self making decisions. But what if that's all just an illusion? What if you're actually two separate consciouses that just happen to be really good at coordinating? Split brain research suggests that might actually be the case. When the connection is severed, the two halves don't merge into chaos. They continue as two separate entities, two centers of awareness, which means in all likelihood they were probably always there. You just never noticed it because they were communicating so seamlessly. So here's a thought experiment. Right now, your left hemisphere is reading these words and understanding them. That's the you that you think of as yourself, the verbal, conscious, decision-making you. But your right hemisphere is also active right now. It's processing the visual layout of the text, the emotional tone of my speak, and the spatial relationships on your screen. It's aware and it's experiencing this exact moment, but it can't talk and it can't tell you what it's thinking. So is it you, or is it someone else trapped inside your head? When someone with alien hand syndrome says, "My hand isn't mine," are they wrong? Or are they just the first people to actually notice that they were always two of them in the first place? There's no surgery to reconnect a severed corpus callosum. Once it's cut, it's cut. Some patients improve over time, the two hemispheres learn to coexist, the alien hand becomes less aggressive and more predictable. It's still there and still independent, but it settles into its own patterns. Cognitive behavioral therapy can help, learning strategies to manage the hand, keeping it occupied and redirecting its impulses. Some medications, particularly those that affect dopamine, can reduce the severity of the symptoms, but they don't quite eliminate them. For most people, it's simply just adaptation, learning to live with a body part that doesn't fully belong to you. Karen Byrne, the woman we started with, eventually learned to manage her alien hand. She kept it busy, she developed routines, she accepted that part of her body was always going to have its own agenda. She's spoken publicly about her experience, she's helped raise awareness, she's shown that you can live a relatively normal life, even when your own hand is working against you. But she's also mentioned that she'll never quite feel whole again, because there's always this sense that I'm divided among myself. And then there are the cases that don't quite fit that pattern. In 2013, a woman developed alien hand syndrome after a stroke. This is a standard case, except her alien hand wasn't just independent, it seemed intelligent. She'd be working on a puzzle with her right hand, and her left hand would start placing pieces correctly, solving the puzzle faster than she could consciously figure it out. Same woman would be writing with her right hand, and her left hand would grab the pen and start correcting her spelling without her intending to. So how does that work if the right hemisphere doesn't have any strong language processing skills? How is it correcting spelling? This one? We don't know. There's another peculiar case from 2009 of a man whose alien hand would only activate when he was stressed out. Calm situations, the hand was fine and he could use it. Under pressure though, it would start acting out, grabbing, hitting, interfering with everything. So was that right hemisphere responding to stress hormones? Was it trying to help, sabotage, express distress in the only way it could? Again, we don't really know. In fact, the more we study this condition, the less about it we understand, because it's the less we know about the consciousness, free will, and what it means to be a unified self. So guys, here we are, a condition where your hand stops being yours. where part of your body develops its own intentions and where you're forced to confront the reality that maybe you were never as unified as you thought. Medical science can explain the mechanism, a severed corpus, loss of inner hemispheric communication, independent motor control. But can it explain what it feels like? Can it explain whether that alien hand is you or not you? Can it explain why some patients say it feels like there's another person inside them? The answer is no, not really. We can map the brain and we can trace the neural pathways. We can see exactly which connections are broken, but we still can't answer that fundamental question of who are you? Are you the left hemisphere talking right now? Are you both hemispheres together? Are you something more than the sum of your parts? People with alien hand syndrome are living proof that the answer isn't as simple as we'd like it to be. Your hand might not be yours, and your brain might just be two separate entities forced to share one body. Your sense of self might be an illusion constructed by your dominant hemisphere to make sense of a fractured reality. And the weirdest part? You'd never know unless something went wrong. Sleep tight, guys. See you in the next one. Thanks for sticking around to the end of this one. I hope it made you think and maybe look at your hands just a little differently. Quick reminder, everything we cover on this channel is based on real cases and real medical phenomena, but these are stories, so we will tell them as stories. Sometimes that means we will recreate dialogue, imagine perspectives, or change names and details to protect the privacy of the victims and their families. We have to make sure the narrative is flowing, so the core facts, those will be real, and the weird and unexplainable details, also real. But we're not writing medical journals here. We want to be sitting around the campfire. And sometimes campfire stories need a little room to breathe. And if you enjoyed this dive into the bizarre, do me a favor and like this video. It helps more people find these stories. And if you haven't already, subscribe and hit that notification bell. We've got plenty more medical oddities to explore. And trust me, some of them make having an alien hand look downright normal. Until next time, stay curious and maybe appreciate that your hands actually listen to you. Peace.